Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. This afternoon, President Trump welcomed the Vietnamese Prime Minister to the White House, but questions turned to whether or not the president will withdraw the United States from a landmark global climate agreement. Trump's top aides have been divided on the issue. If the U.S. leaves, it's a move certain to anger foes and some allies who devoted years negotiating the accord to reduce carbon emissions. Correspondent Mark Irons is at the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump pledged during last year's campaign to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement to reduce carbon emissions immediately after taking office. But since then, he seems to have wavered, seeking counsel from a range of advisors in the West Wing and his cabinet. President Trump was asked this afternoon if he would be exiting the Paris Accord, and he promised again, "You're going to find out very soon."
President Trump teasing political supporters and critics alike by tweeting this morning, "I will be announcing my decision on the Paris Accord over the next few days. Make America great again." During Trump's overseas trip last week, European leaders pressed him to keep the U.S. in the landmark agreement. Many in his sphere, including Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, favor remaining in the agreement. On Thursday, Tillerson signed an international declaration highlighting the importance of the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement was reached in December 2015 and ratified by 147 nations, including the U.S. It commits countries to voluntarily reduce greenhouse gas emissions in order to limit the global average temperature increase to a maximum of 2 degrees Celsius.
There's a number of things that are required of us as caretakers of God's gift of creation.
Supporters of the accord, like Daniel Misla of the Catholic Climate Covenant, argue climate change is a moral issue. Pope Francis released his encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home on Pentecost 2 years ago, timing it to influence debate on the Paris Agreement. In it, Pope Francis urged, humanity is called to recognize the need for changes of lifestyle, production, and consumption in order to combat this warming, or at least the human causes which produce or aggravate it. Misla says the beauty of the Pope's encyclical is that it links protecting the environment with protecting the poor and disadvantaged.
How we care for one another will often indicate how we will care for the earth and vice versa.
But some experts say the agreement would be ineffective.
It was a costly, energy-killing, job-killing agreement that would have no impact on climate change.
Lawmakers in the president's party agree. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and 21 other Republicans sent Trump a letter last week urging him to follow through on his campaign pledge to leave the agreement. Meanwhile, 40 Democratic senators sent a letter saying withdrawal could hurt America's credibility. Lauren?
Mark, what are U.S. businesses saying?
Well, hundreds of high-profile businesses have spoken out in favor of the deal, including Apple, Google, and Walmart. There are fossil fuel companies like ExxonMobil, BP, and Shell that say the United States should abide by the deal. Lauren?
Correspondent Mark Irons reporting from the White House. Thank you, Mark.